All right. Hello and good morning. I'm Joshua. I'm the guy who runs this YouTube channel and the pastor of a church here just south of Cambridge in North Hertfordshire. A lot of questions have been coming up, particularly over the last week concerning lockdowns, concerning civil disobedience. When is it right for Christians to disobey government? Is there ever a time for Christians to disobey government, particularly in our context where we are? And it's very similar over in America. But we're being told by leaders that it is wrong, that it is illegal to go and see friends and family and celebrate Christmas with them. And understandably, this provokes a lot of questions. Do we just submit? Romans 13 says that we should submit to the powers that be. Does that mean I should stay alone, particularly for people who don't have any family, who live by themselves? Is it wrong for me to go see friends and family, to hug them, to celebrate on this day? So what I want to do over in this video and the next couple of videos is sort of give you a bit of theological history. These are questions that Christians have been wrestling with and dealing with for 2,000 years. How to relate to the state, that's been an ever-going question. So this isn't the first time Christians have had to answer these type of questions. And so what I'm going to do today is just give a brief overview of the early church up into Luther. I know that might seem like a big ask, but it's going to be mostly focused on Luther. In the next video, I'm going to talk about Calvin and the French reformers. And then lastly, on the third, I'm going to talk about the English reformers and what's passed into English common law. And that kind of laid the groundwork for the founding of the United States in their government. So how have Christians understood these things over the years? Well, Jesus himself is very famous for saying, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's. But where exactly Caesar's authority stops and God's authority begins, like what belongs to Caesar and what belongs to God, where that line falls, that's been discussed and debated among Christian leaders for, well, since Jesus has been around. As you can imagine, for the early church, that included, like, can Christians be part of workers' guilds? Like, if you're a convert to Christianity, you were a normal Greco-Roman pagan, you became a Christian, but your guild, let's say you are a builder of some sort, and you help build houses in the ancient world, but the guild that you were part of was, that guild was dedicated to a certain pagan god or pagan deity, and once a year your guild was supposed to offer up an offering. What do you do in that circumstance? Can you still be submissive to the leaders of the guild, or do you have to leave? What about when there are certain, if you're a public servant? What if you're a soldier? Now, for a lot of times people say, well, early Christians were pacifists. Well, yes and no. Not all leaders thought it was wrong to be a soldier as such, but the Roman army was dedicated to the cult of the emperor. There were religious connotations to being a soldier. And so was it the fact that it was just wrong for Christians to carry a sword as such, or to be a soldier or a police officer? Or did it have to do more with the religious implications? Were they encouraging Christians to leave because as soldiers they would have to engage in, in some sort of religious obligations? This was all argued in the early church. When you get to the time of Augustine, Augustine was, the theologian that's helped shaped both Catholic and Protestant theology, particularly in the West, in Western Christianity, probably more than any other thinker. Augustine's view of government was largely negative. He saw it as the beast, and referred to as Daniel and the apocalypse, that this was a power-hungry, sinful area, and that government was just, because of the fall, was inherently bad. And so from the time of Augustine onward, for many centuries, Christians had a very negative view of government. A king's court, a ruler's offices. This was a place where demons were. And so the view of government has been negative. This is the beast. We want limited, small government as much as possible. And that view ruled really up until the time of Thomas Aquinas. Now, Thomas Aquinas, he was largely influenced by the Renaissance in thinking that came from the rediscovering of a lot of Greco-Roman literature, and Aquinas was influenced a lot by Aristotle. And Aristotle had a more positive view about the potential of human government and what they could do. Aquinas really adopted these views, and he infused into Western Christian thinking at least a positive potential for government. Not that he agreed with Augustine that it was, because of sin was in the world and corruption was possible. And yet, because God is good and God gives grace, that human government can still be a great force for good. So Aquinas began to put a new positive spin on the Christian view of government. Now, this brings us up to the time of Luther now. Now, for my Catholic viewers, you think I've just skipped over, 1,500 years of church history in 2 minutes, and now I'll be focusing on Protestantism the rest of the time. Well, I did. Guilty as charged. I am Protestant, but even though I'm going to be focusing on Protestant thinkers, a lot of Catholics would still have very similar views. And I must confess, Upan, I'm pretty ignorant on where Greek Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, Russian Orthodox theologians and thinkings are on the relationship between church and state. I know they can be very nationalistic sometimes, and I'm intrigued to learn more. I just don't know that much to comment on. But I want to talk about Luther for a second and how those of us who are Protestants have got our views. So it started with Charles V. As you may know, Charles V, he was the Holy Roman Emperor at the time of Luther. And Luther comes along and his ideas start spreading throughout the empire. Now, Charles the Roman V was a dedicated Catholic, and he wanted his empire, he wanted the regions that he governed to be, decidedly Catholic. However, he was fighting the French on one side, he was fighting the Ottoman Empire on the other. He even though he was a devout Catholic, he's even fought a war with the Pope, so he couldn't go through the empire and start rooting out Protestantism because he needed his whole country behind him. But everyone knew it was only a matter of time. Once the wars with France and the Ottomans and all of them stopped, he was going to go through and he was going to try to eliminate Protestantism. It was only a matter of time. So what happened was all the Protestant princes, so those princes, those leaders, those nobles who had converted to Protestantism, they were aware that this was going to come their way. And so they formed an alliance. And that is, if Charles V ever attacked one of them, then it was an attack on all of them. So it was a political ploy as like a deterrent, like, don't you dare begin to root out Protestantism, because you take that first step, we're all going to respond. And so they come to Luther and they say, Luther would, he was such an influential figure, even though he had no political office. They wanted his blessing on this. And Luther, you might be surprised, he refused. That's right. He refused to bless the Protestant alliance. Why? He pointed to Romans 13, that you need to submit to the powers that be. And he said, listen, he is God's ordained governor, and we need to submit. And if you can't obey, you think he's doing something contrary to the will of God, you just must be a conscientious objector and, and disobey, break with your leader, and then accept whatever consequences come your way and be submissive. Now, it should be pointed out, of course, that Luther was not entirely consistent on this point. He himself had been declared an outlaw. The Holy Roman Empire, and was in hiding and was being protected by one of the electors, Frederick William there. So if he had been consistent, he would have, turned himself into Charles. But it just goes to show Luther was a social conservative. He did not want a tearing down of the hierarchy of the day. He had no problem with nobles, class, these sorts of things. And this, by personality, I'm a social conservative as well. Like I'm not all for tear the structure down, level the playing field. No, I'm fine with structures with authority. Luther was. Typically Christians have been. We're not revolutionaries in that sense. Luther had seen the Peasants Revolt, where the peasants rose up and tried to throw off the nobility, and he was against that. He had a fear for, he feared anarchy. And so he liked social stability, and with his Reformation, he wanted to try to change things within the structures that be. He didn't want to overthrow them as such. And so he denied these princes, these Protestant princes, the right to form this alliance. Whoa. So, that was not the answer that the princes wanted to hear, obviously. So they come back a second time and try, and they're like, well, okay, Romans 13. That was designed, when Paul wrote that, he was not writing to princes. He was writing to the common people who should obey their rulers. But this is different. Princes are also rulers, and they are also people to whom people should submit, because they are also leaders. So it's one leader against the other. Okay, so they try that reason on Luther. But Luther throws it back at him and he says, yes, okay, you princes, you are also rulers to whom people should submit, but there is a ruler over you, and that is the emperor, and you should submit to him. So Luther's being very firm on this. But then the princes come back one last time with another argument, and they say, but Luther, you're forgetting something. Where did the emperor come from? The emperor was elected by 7 electors that represented the princes of the Holy Roman Empire. And therefore, the princes don't just have a right to rebuke, correct, remove the emperor, they have a duty to do so, because the emperor got their authority from us as electors. This made Luther stop and think. Paused, rubbed his little German chin, drank some German beer. He said, you know what? You're right. You're right. You do. The authority for him to rule came from you guys. And therefore, if he's not acting in alliance with the Holy Roman Emperor Constitution and the way this thing is set up, if he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing when you guys elected him, if he's not opposing the evil and upholding the good, well then yes, then you guys have a right to rebel against him and try to remove him and put somebody else in his place. And so he ended up blessing this Protestant alliance. With the was called the Torgau Memorandum of 1530. So Luther issued his blessing onto that Protestant alliance. And what the doctrine that Luther developed was that of the lesser magistrates. Now listen, this is important for us both in the UK and the United States, if you're still with me, because we've seen this happen on both sides of the Atlantic. We've seen Boris Johnson, the prime minister, try to put the country under lockdown, and a mayor of a town refused. He says, I'm not doing this to my people. My people are already losing their jobs. Shops are closing. Suicide rates are up. We're going to let our people work. We're going to let them have jobs. We're going to let them be able to provide for their families. And what's called the upper magistrates, the prime minister and the people with the more power, look down at what Luther would have called the lesser or the inferior magistrates, and say, no, you have to obey us because we have more authority than you. What Luther said was that reform and and sort of, if you will, a challenging of authority can happen, but it has to be done through lesser magistrates, through inferior magistrates, the common man. So you and me, and me as a pastor, or you as, whatever your job might be, unless you're a mayor, unless you hold public office of some sort, you can't just overthrow the system. But if you are a lesser magistrate, if you do hold this sort of public office and responsibility, and the people above you, they're not doing what is righteous, they're not upholding the Constitution or the laws that they were sworn in to obey, then you can challenge them and seek to remove them. But the common Christian, so you and me as believers, we can't just go revolt. But if there is a higher magistrate being bad and a lesser magistrate being good, we can go and throw our influence and support behind the lesser magistrate. So example, in California, you have Gavin Newsom shutting down churches, shutting businesses. It's just been a complete economic, emotional, psychological, mental health terms, just an absolute disaster. But there have been sheriffs, there have been local leaders, saying we're not going to enforce what the governor says because we believe he is in the wrong. In that case, Luther would argue, so I'm just representing Luther here. Luther would say that, okay, Christians can go and therefore support that lesser magistrate and seek to replace the upper magistrate with the lesser magistrate. But you have to work within these systems of authority. You just can't have a general revolution where the mobs and the peasants and the common people rise up and throw off the whole system. Okay, so that was Luther's idea. This is next time we're going to be looking at how Calvin developed this a little bit further, and then in the third video we are going to be we'll look at how this affected English and American thought. Hey, if you're interested in this subject and these sorts of videos, please like and subscribe, and you'll get more. They'll pop up on your newsfeed. So love to see it. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you with the next video. Bye-bye.